of the biggest shows on the planet ended within 5 months of each other this year. One of them had almost 10 years to plan its ending. The other had 7. Both had more money than most small countries. Both had fan bases large enough to crash a website. And both of them still walked away from their finales with the internet split right down the middle. I'm talking about Stranger Things and The Boys. 2 shows that could not be more different in tone, that somehow ran into the exact same wall from 2 completely different directions. One had too much time and used almost none of it well. The other had just enough time and ran out of room to use it at all. So today we're doing an autopsy, not a review. An autopsy. We're going to look at what actually happened behind the scenes of both of these endings, compare them to some of the most infamous finales in TV history, and figure out the actual pattern behind why some shows get to end on their own terms and others get dragged across the finish line. Here's the thing about endings in the streaming era. They used to be optional. A show could just get canceled, fade out, and nobody expected closure. Now, every show is a 10-year investment from its audience, tracked episode by episode, theorized about on 100 subreddits, and treated like a relationship people have actually been in, which means the ending isn't just the last chapter anymore. It's the thing that decides how the entire show gets remembered. A strong ending, and people rewatch the whole series for years. A weak one, and the whole thing gets quietly filed away as that show that used to be good. We've all watched it happen to shows we loved. So the real question isn't, was the finale good or bad? That's a taste question, and everyone's got a different answer. The real question is, what actually determines whether a finale has a shot at landing in the first place before a single frame is shot? And weirdly, the answer has almost nothing to do with how talented the writers are. Let's start with Stranger Things, because this one comes with a documentary that basically hands us the evidence. The final season closed out on New Year's Eve with a 2-hour finale that Netflix pushed into over 600 theaters at the same time it hit streaming. On paper, that's about as much support as a show can possibly get. Critics were mostly kind to it too, landing somewhere in the mid-80s% on Rotten Tomatoes. Audiences did not agree. The audience score landed in the mid-50s, which made it the single biggest gap between critics and regular viewers in the show's entire run. Complaints clustered around 2 things. Characters constantly restating emotions the audience already understood out loud, and threats that got built up for years, then got resolved almost too easily once the finale actually arrived. Now here's where it gets interesting. A couple weeks after the finale dropped, Netflix released a behind-the-scenes documentary about the making of the final season. It was supposed to be a victory lap. Instead, it turned into the most useful piece of evidence in this entire video, because the creators say the quiet part out loud, on camera, without realizing how it would land once the finale had already underwhelmed people. In the documentary, one of the creators admits they started shooting the finale before the script was actually finished. Not close to finished. Genuinely still being written while cameras were already rolling. A crew member on set is shown saying they were filming an episode that, quote, wasn't completely written yet, so nobody fully knew what was happening in it. One of the 2 showrunners even says on camera that he hadn't read all the way through the final episode before they started shooting it. That's not a small detail. That's the entire show's ending being assembled in real time, on a shoot with hundreds of crew members and a budget the size of a small studio's yearly output, with the 2 people who understood the story best admitting they were behind. And once fans put that together with how the finale actually felt, over-explained, oddly gentle on its own stakes, spending a huge chunk of runtime on an epilogue instead of the actual confrontation, a theory started spreading that the ending we got wasn't even the real one. It picked up the nickname Conformity Gate, and for about a week, a meaningful chunk of the fandom genuinely believed Netflix was sitting on a secret 9th episode that would air a week later and retroactively fix everything. People pointed to numbers appearing in the background of shots, a line about not believing in coincidences, and a marketing event Netflix had scheduled for that exact date. It obviously wasn't true. Netflix's big announcement that day was just a preview of their upcoming slate. Nothing to do with Stranger Things at all. But so many people refreshed the show's page hoping for a surprise episode that the traffic reportedly helped crash the site for a while. Think about that for a second. A fan base was more willing to believe in a secret hidden episode than to believe the ending they watched was simply the ending the writers meant to make. That's not a compliment to the finale. That's what it looks like when an audience loves something so much They'd rather invent a conspiracy than accept it just didn't stick the landing. Now flip to The Boys, because this show had almost the opposite problem, and it's a much better contrast than it first looks. The final season wrapped up in the spring, and going in, the showrunner had reportedly been openly nervous for weeks that fans were going to hate how it ended. The season had already been shaky. The second to last episode became the lowest rated episode the show had ever produced, a series that up to that point had never dropped below a strong score in its entire run. Then the actual finale landed, and it split people almost exactly down the middle too, just for a completely different reason than Stranger Things. This wasn't an over-explained, over-padded finale. If anything, it was the opposite. After 7 years building toward a final showdown with basically a living god of a villain, the actual confrontation played out in about an hour, mostly contained to one room, and wrapped up faster than a lot of viewers expected for a threat that size. Complaints centered on the fight feeling small for what had been built up, a major supporting character getting frozen out of the ending entirely, and a widely loved spin-off cast barely getting used despite a full season of setup. The show did stick a few landing. The two central rivals both meeting their ends felt earned to a lot of people, and several actors got singled out for genuinely great final performances. But the overall pattern of criticism was strikingly consistent. Not enough time, not enough space, a huge saga trying to squeeze its resolution into a standard runtime, instead of expanding to match the scale of what it was resolving. So look at what we've actually got. One show massively over-explains and overruns its ending because it had too much unstructured time and not enough finished plan. The other under-delivers its ending because it stuck rigidly to a normal runtime for a story that had clearly outgrown it. Different symptoms, same root disease. The ending wasn't given the shape it actually needed because nobody built enough room for it ahead of time. Here's the part that should be a little unsettling. None of this is new. Streaming just made the fallout louder and faster. Think about Lost. That show's mythology ballooned for years, partly because the network wanted it running as long as possible. And only once ratings started sliding did the creators finally get an actual end date locked in. Once they had that number, the final stretch tightened up considerably, because for the first time, they were building towards something instead of stalling for time. Or look at Game of Thrones, a show that spent its early seasons adapting books that already existed, then had to sprint through an ending nobody had fully written yet once the show caught up to its source material. The final season got noticeably shorter and faster than everything before it, and it remains one of the most heavily criticized final seasons in modern TV, largely for the exact same complaint Stranger Things is getting now. Things resolving faster than the buildup ever suggested they would. Then there's the opposite failure mode. How I Met Your Mother filmed pieces of its ending years before the show actually got there, because the creators wanted to lock in a twist early. Problem is, the characters grew and changed so much over 9 seasons that by the time the real finale aired, a big chunk of the audience felt like it was paying off a version of the story that didn't match who these people had actually become anymore. Planning ahead isn't automatically the answer either, if you plan so early that the show outgrows the plan. Compare all of that to something like Breaking Bad and its follow-up Better Call Saul. Both of those are usually held up as some of the best landed endings in modern television, and it's not really a mystery why. Both had endings that were broadly mapped well in advance. Both got the runtime and the network patience to actually build toward that ending instead of stalling or sprinting. And both were allowed to finish on the creator's terms instead of a streaming service's release calendar. So the pattern isn't plan everything years ahead, and it isn't wing it and stay flexible. The pattern is much more boring and much more structural. Shows land their endings when the people writing them are given enough time, enough space, and enough trust to actually execute the plan they already have. They fall apart when any one of those 3 things gets taken away. And here's a detail that connects both of this year's messiest endings that barely got talked about. While both of these shows were finishing their final seasons, both of their creative teams were simultaneously developing spin-offs set in the same universe. Stranger Things has an animated prequel series and a live-action spin-off already in motion. The Boys has its own prequel series in development that was being set up during the same season that was supposed to be delivering the actual ending. That's not a coincidence. And it's not really anyone's villain origin story either. It's just modern franchise economics. A hit show isn't just a show anymore. It's a intellectual property that a streaming service wants to keep monetizing well past its natural ending point. So the same handful of writers and showrunners end up splitting their attention between closing out the story fans have been following for years, and simultaneously building the next thing that's gonna keep the lights on. Something has to give. And usually what gives is the thing where the actual finale needed 100% of the writer's focus, and instead got maybe 70. So if you're wondering why it feels like almost nothing sticks the landing anymore, it's not that writers have gotten worse at their job. It's that the economics around them have made finish this properly, compete directly against keep this franchise alive forever. And forever usually wins the argument in the room that actually approves budgets. The shows that do land their endings, the Breaking Bads, the handful of others that pull it off, mostly share one boring trait. Somebody, somewhere, protected the ending from everything else that wanted to interfere with it. That's it. That's the whole secret. Not genius. Just protection. Which finale actually broke your heart the most? And be honest about whether it was the writing that failed you or the deadline that failed the writing. Drop it in the comments. I actually read all of them.